All right, are you ready? All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Red Barn event. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Rebecca. I'm the Education Director here at Wenatchee River Institute. WRI is a nonprofit with a mission to connect people, communities, and the natural world. Also here this evening is Joshua, our community programs educator, and he's helping make it possible for folks to interact with our event at home, as well as recording it for later so folks can watch it on YouTube. Wenatchee River Institute works towards our mission through our youth and community education programs. Our youth programs deliver hands-on curricula up and down the Wenatchee Valley, and our Traveling Naturalist program now reaches as far as Brewster, giving experiential learning opportunities to 4th and 5th graders. Our community programs reach people through many Red Barn events like this one, our seasonal walks, workshops, Bird Fest, and the community garden. Tomorrow, we are super lucky to have a workshop with Marina, our presenter tonight. She is teaching nature writing, Come to Your Senses, here at WRI at 2 p.m. This is an awesome opportunity to practice writing that will engage in all 5 of your senses. And there are still spots. If you are feeling excited after tonight's presentation, you can register, and we would love to see you in a workshop tomorrow. Another aspect of WRI is our effort to connect Indigenous peoples to their ancestral lands here. And I would like to take time to share our land acknowledgement with you. This land acknowledgement was created alongside the Shinpesquawshu people, and we are spreading the message they wish to be spread to the public. The land Wenatchee River Institute sits on is the ancestral homelands of the Shinpesquawshu people. The Shinpesquawshu, meaning people in between, had villages positioned along the Wenatchee River and surrounding areas. Their ancestral homeland extends from the Cascade Ridge throughout what is now known as the Wenatchee and Okanagan Valleys. The culture and economy of the Shinpesquawshu people centers on taking care of the land. They fish, hunt, gather berries and roots, basket-making materials, and medicines. The Shinpesquawshu are named within the Yakima Treaty of 1855. Language to establish the Wenatchee Reservation was never followed through, even with the needed surveying completed. Many Shinpesquawshu now live on the Colville Reservation, 150 miles northeast of Leavenworth. They were forced off their land here, and the U.S. government moved them to this reservation. The Shinpesquawshu people are still alive today. They continue to practice their culture, harvest their traditional foods and medicines, and hold their ceremonies passed down from their ancestors. Most people won't see or notice them, but they continue to be on the land they are connected to. Their traditional language is In-Ham-Chin, an interior Salish dialect, and we would like to welcome you all by saying hello in their language. Tilhusht. We offer this land acknowledgement as the first step to amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people. We stand as an ally to recognize their connection to the land and their right to practice their culture on these sacred lands. We encourage all to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the place you now call home. The Wenatchee River Institute is committed to sharing this land acknowledgement and following up with other actions to educate and be respectful. Before we start tonight's presentation, I would also like to thank our sponsors. We are really grateful for the support of many sponsors throughout our community. And so as you are out and about in Leavenworth, you can know that these are some of the businesses that help make our Red Barn events possible. Our major sponsors are Gustav's Grill and Beer Garden, Ludwig's German Restaurant, the Obertal Inn, Posey Hand-Picked Goods, South Restaurants, Hotel Pension Anna, Munchen House, Sleeping Lady Mountain Resort, North Central Washington Audubon Society, and Icicle Brewing. Our other sponsors include the Cove Resort at Fish Lake, Kolchak Consignment, Riverfront Rock Gym, Mountain Home Lodge, and Mitchell Reed and Schmitten Insurance. We are also super grateful for our partnership with A Book for All Seasons, and A Book for All Seasons is here this evening. So if you have not had a chance to buy a book yet and you want to buy one after, go say hi to Randy and you can get your book. And after all of that introduction, our speaker tonight, Marina Richie, is a nature writer and author of Halcyon Journey, In Search of the Belted Kingfisher, winner of the 2022 National Outdoor Book Award. Her articles and essays have appeared in Birdwatching Magazine, Appalachian Trail Journeys, Post Road Magazine, Think Journal, and other publications, including 2 books, Placed, an Encyclopedia of Central Oregon, and Field Notes from the Montana Natural History Center. Marina is the author of 2 children's books as well, Bird Feats of Montana and Bug Feats of Montana. She has worked as a journalist, managed communication for wildlife-oriented organizations, and currently serves on the board of the Greater Hells Canyon Council. She lives in Bend, Oregon with her husband, Wes, and Labrador Pepper. Marina, we are so glad you're here this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica. I got to make sure I'm all mic'd. Okay, good. Well, welcome. I'm going to let's get queued up. It's so delightful to be here. I didn't get here with enough time to go look for kingfishers, but how many of you see them along the Wenatchee River? I think we have quite a few kingfisher aficionados, but hopefully you'll be learning a few things that you don't know yet. So I'm going to bring this over a little closer, right? Move this, oops, moved it. There we go. So we can stay in view for all the hybrid viewers. Are we good? Okay, so my message tonight on the Belted Kingfisher is the kingfisher is the messenger of waterways. And I'm delighted to present to this group with the Wenatchee River Institute. Thank you, Joshua, Becca, Randy with the bookstore. So good to be here. So why a messenger of the riverways? Well, found all the way across North America, as well as right here in Washington, the kingfisher, I think, is a fine messenger. It has a calling out in that rattling way, which I bet you've all heard, telling us to act on behalf of our clean, fish-filled, vibrant waters, especially in a time of accelerating climate change and drought in the West, and telling us to care for the water that's lifeways for so many animals, and calling us also to come closer to nature for healing and for kinship and for regeneration of our spirits, and for more of us to become messengers. Well, I'd really like to begin with my humble gratitude for the Indigenous peoples who have known the Belted Kingfisher since time immemorial. Rattled greetings from the Kingfisher. Oops, let's go. Is it gonna play? No, it's not. Oh, we got to hear the Kingfisher.
It was playing there.
I know. Do I have to hit something else? Oh, maybe you have to hit that. Not falling. Oops. It worked before. Let's see if Josh can get it to work. You got to hear the Kingfisher. If not, no, together, all together. Have a little, maybe it's down. I try it. It's like, how do you guys do? One more time. If not, I have this tiny little card, which is like, this will be very quiet though, if Joshua can't get it to play. Here's our little miniature sound. Okay, we might have to go with that. Okay. Oh, excellent. Oh my gosh. And now it's like dueling kingfishers. Oh, everybody play their kingfisher. They're Merlin, right? This is hilarious. So, well, we know the word in English, Belted Kingfisher. Well, that has kind of that English sounding name, but try it in the language of Indigenous peoples. And I'm going to share just a few of the ones that I've learned in my journey. And the first 2 are from the Southern Oregon coast. The Coos-Hanas, the word is pronounced Shijichis. And then the Siuslaw and Lower Umpqua, Shiahi. And then over in Montana, where a lot of my book is based, in Salish, it's Tishlis. And then I learned one more rather recently when I was down at the Winter Wings Festival from the Yurok tribe. And I think this is right, it's like Shilel. But all of those words have, to me, I don't know about to you, but such a sound, an onomatopoeia sound of river and kingfisher in place. So beautiful. So I also wanted to mention that this kingfisher, this perky female who's looking right at you with her beak wide open, is the photographer Charles Wheeler is in Idaho, and he has so generously loaned the use of many of his photos. So I'm putting his name here, but I won't. When you see all the rest of the kingfisher photos, those are his. And the reason I put this kingfisher with this announcement is, I don't know if all of you know this, but the kingfisher is the bird of the year for the American Birding Association for 2023, first time ever. So I'm pretty excited about that, since my book happens to be the only book about the Belted Kingfisher so far. So, and I think it's a great choice for the messenger. And so I'll talk just briefly now about the book, and then we'll get back to it again. But first, I always like to praise Oregon State University Press. My publisher has been fantastic to work with, and they have a great, wonderful books you should check out. And then just quickly, the book threads my personal story, first person narrative over 7 years, mostly on a creek. And I combine that with natural history of the bird and mythology, Greek and indigenous. And so come along with me on this journey. And before we do that, though, I've got to honor my artist, wonderful Ram Papish. He's hilarious. He's a good photographer, and he did 16 illustrations throughout my book that I think really bring it to life. And he and I have worked quite a bit together. Another hat I sometimes wear is to make a living, and kind of fun is I write interpretive signs, wayside exhibits. So this is one we did that's up and down the whole Oregon coast, and is an award-winning series, about 67 signs featuring all the Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge. So Ram did the art, and I sneaked in some kingfishers in there. So when my book came out, almost a year ago, it's been almost a year since the book came out, all the people who pre-ordered started sending me these photos. So I had to think how wonderful it is that my book is being read outdoors in amazing places, sometimes guarded by a dog, apparently. And this particular photo right up here of me, I had this like ceremonial hike with the book up to the top of Stort Peak outside Missoula, Montana, which is an 18-mile round trip, and it's the headwaters of the creek that I studied, and it plays a role in the book. So I had to bring it up there, and my son, who is now 25, came, and my husband. So, but first, even though I know you know a lot about kingfishers already, I love to put up the robin and the belted kingfisher side by side, because I often compare birds to robins. And you know, the kingfisher is just a tad bit bigger than a robin, but it's fun to see the differences, right? You can see that huge crested head, and it's just that every head of a kingfisher, if you notice, it's just kind of out of proportion compared to the rest of their body. And then that dagger of a beak and those obsidian eyes. But have you checked out the toes? Compare the tiny little feet of those kingfishers compared to a robin. You're never going to see a kingfisher hopping around in a yard. You'll certainly never see them in your yard. So that's a wonderful thing to notice too. And I think this robin, though, is trying to say, hey, I may not have a long beak, but I can hold 2 berries. So, and of course, what we all know is the kingfisher is a magnificent angler, and is one that you'll be hearing a lot more about. And besides fish, every now and then, in a pinch, there might be a crayfish. So When the waters are muddy and hard to find fish, sometimes they'll eat even frogs and sometimes some big salmon flies, so they can be a bit opportunist. So this evening, I promised to include, at least in my write-up for this, that I would read a little bit from the book. So here and there, I have an excerpt that I printed out, and this seemed to fit. This photo almost seemed like it belongs to this scene that I'm going to read to you about a male and a female together. I saw her, a female kingfisher, perched on a fallen tree, moored in the center of the river. Her crested head was the blue of washed denim, tousled and sodden. White neck feathers formed a gleaming ring above a slate blue band that dipped to a point on her snowy chest. Below that, a rusty red belt clasped in mid-belly and draped down both flanks, partly hidden by closed wings of blue-gray hues. Only the female wears the namesake belt, and that could be meaningful. In contrast, a male shows a single bluish upper band like a prim bandana on his white breast. In the bird world, males are almost always more colorful than females when there's a difference between the two. The rare gender reversal drew me in like the myth. You'll be hearing about the myth. Could I chase clues to this puzzle that scientists had yet to solve? A male flew in, a pinwheel of whites and thunderous blues, his flurry of notes pattered like rain. She preened her wet feathers. He landed and then lifted off, each downward wing stroke scooping the heavy air. She followed him skyward, wheeling to expose white underwings with the reddish plumage extending into her armpits, like the work of a slapdash painter. Circling once, they descended in unison to the same driftwood that parted the currents. He looked upriver, and she swiveled her head to glance downriver. Out in the middle of the turbid Yellowstone River, the pair seemed unperturbed by the torrent. Or were they? Perhaps their hearts beat faster in each other's presence, like two people on a park bench in the rain, wildly attracted to each other. So I do chase that mystery throughout the book. And another thing, of course, that makes the kingfisher so special as a messenger and the bird of the year is where they nest. How many of you already knew where kingfishers, did any of you not? No, I won't put you on the spot, but is it a surprise? It was a surprise to me quite a few years back that kingfishers do not build a twig nest or stick nest, that they dig an earthen burrow. So you'll be hearing more about that. But first, I wanted to put the kingfisher in perspective of all the kingfisher species, of our belted kingfisher in perspective with all the species in the world. And just a hint, that's a sampling, that's not the total. So I wondered if any of you want to make a guess what the latest number is for the number of species of kingfishers in the world. In the back, Nate, he's getting ready.
I would say somewhere
Around 100. Anyone else want to guess? That's a lot. 20. It's like a game show. And we have 20, and we have 100. Okay, one more. 30. Okay, well, Nate, if we were giving out prizes, he's going to win because there are 120 worldwide. Isn't that amazing? So they're found on every continent except Antarctica, and they can be such brilliant, gorgeous colors. And some of them have, like that common paradise one, has such a long tail compared to our little short-tailed belted kingfisher. But here in the Canada and the US, we mostly have the belted kingfisher, and just down near the Mexico border, you can get the ringed green and sometimes the Amazon. But you know what? If you notice, they really do have that kingfisher look, don't they? With that big head, the strong bills, and the tiny feet, and they are all burrow nesters. Some of them may nest in a termite mound. They'll dig a nest in there in Africa, and some in like the kookaburra, which is the biggest kingfisher in the world, is in a tree, excavates in a tree. But not all of them are fishing birds. A lot of them aren't actually. They may just be sit and wait in a tropical forest, ready to pounce, always head first, down on some kind of lizard or something. So, but sadly, like a lot of things and species in our world right now, more than half of the species are at risk from critically endangered to vulnerable. So, we got to do our part to keep the birds in our world. There's the biodiversity is so incredibly important. But here, our Belted Kingfisher is doing pretty well as birds go. And yet, we still have, what I got to get the figure here, but it's like we have 1.7 million breeding kingfishers. But that's down from what they were before, and I don't have this right in front of me because I got all excited and forgot to look at my notes pages in here. But anyway, what I did want to show you is where they are on the orangish color up there is because that's where in the breeding season, the kingfishers are up in the Canada and Yukon, but then guess what? Everything freezes over, they move south. And then the purple area is where you will find Belted kingfishers year round, and the blue is wintering. But what happens, and I'm pretty sure this is true in Leavenworth because it's pretty cold here, is the females, if there's going to be migrating birds, it's the females, and males will stick it out as long as they can find open water. And it has to do with them being so territorial about their nesting areas. So the females are more of the ones but they can go all the way, some can go all the way down to as you can see, the tip of South America. But I thought how many of you are aware that the kingfishers nest on the coast, on coastal cliffs? Did any of you know that? Well, this particular scene in the photo that I have here is exactly from my book because I took these pictures, and I thought I would share this little piece from the book. One memorable evening on the Oregon coast, as golden sun rays lapped upon a sandstone outcrop that stood between me and a vigilant kingfisher, the receding high tide yielded just enough room to edge around the corner within view of a nest hole excavated by the diligent parents. One cautious step at a time, I ducked below leathery green leaves of a salal bush. In my black down jacket, gray pants, and rubber boots, I hoped to blend in like a cormorant. Instead, I faced the full fury of an indignant queen fisher. Her crown was a feathery two-part crest, her throne a lichen-draped branch, and her decree a volley of reproving notes. I gazed with longing at the burnished coppery red belt on a moon-white chest and yearned to plead my case. I'm your subject. I will stay right here and fasten myself to the sandstone cliff like a barnacle. I won't be in your way. But no, she breezed off to cross the bay that opened to the Pacific. I backed away into the linger of light, leaving the nesting kingfishers in peace. Now, in this picture, the actual nest hole is the upper one, and you can kind of see there's a little furrow marks where they go in and out. So as you'll find, if you're ever looking for a nest, can be multiple holes and only one active nest, and those little furrows are a good way to tell. But let me get to where my journey begins. So the heartbeat of my story pulses along this creek, Rattlesnake Creek in Missoula, Montana. And there's still a pair of kingfishers that nest and court and nest and tend their young to the music of rollicking currents. And over the course of 7 years, from spring 2008 through summer of 2015, I followed with curiosity as the birds continued to baffle, elude, and enlighten. And this is a map. How many of you, any of you been to Missoula by chance? Couple few, you have. Yeah, well, I just wanted to give a little setting here, and this is in the book. These are Ram's illustrations, but Rattlesnake Creek flows 22 miles from headwaters in the Rattlesnake National Recreation Area in the wilderness, and then comes in to meet the Clark Fork River downtown in Missoula. And in this, you can't really see it on the map, but I have Salish place names, and I try to honor the Salish names throughout. And the word in Salish, the translation for the confluence of the Missoula, of Rattlesnake Creek and the Clark Fork River, is place of the bull trout. So I was very conscious throughout of being in and honoring the Salish homeland. But why do you think then I would name the book Halcyon Journey? Well, kind of shocked me. And I'm going to read you this. Chapter 1 begins, leaning over the balcony railing of the second-story bedroom, I listened to the surge of Rattlesnake Creek flooding 2 blocks away. Close by, a yellow warbler sang the morning into buttery sweetness. Robins caroled, magpies squawked, but the ringing staccato of the bird I longed to hear would never mingle with backyard birds. Instead, the belted kingfisher would be pelting downstream on strong wings, always looking for fish. Well, minutes earlier, I'd read the dictionary word of the day, and this is what I read, and I didn't know that. I actually did know the word halcyon as calm, quiet, peaceful, halcyon years, idyllic, happy, but I didn't know that the noun, the number 1 definition is the kingfisher, and the second that it's a mythical bird. So I got pretty excited, and right away, I'll read a little more. Tracing the halcyon definition to an ancient Greek myth, I read of 2 lovers, Halcyon and Ceyx, transformed by the gods Zeus and Hera into kingfishers destined to nest annually over the winter solstice. Then Aeolus, god of the winds and father of Halcyon, would calm the rough waves for 14 days, 7 on either side of the solstice. Sailors called the interlude the Halcyon days, bracketed by storms. Well, it's a myth. As you can tell, the actual common kingfisher that's in Greece nests in a burrow deep inside. But that's a beautiful image, I think, by this artist of the myth. And when it comes to myths, I have always been just entranced by turning into a bird, starting pretty young. And as I write in my book, since childhood, I dreamed of feathers, light hollow bones, and lofting above the earth on wings that would never let me fall, pursue a bird of happiness and transformation I was in. And I have to tell you, this photo of me at age 8 and my older brother at 9 is in Mount Rainier National Park. So I do have a connection with Washington as a child, and it's in my book. My father was the assistant superintendent there for a couple pivotal years in my life. And then we did move over to the east side, and we're over in Cooley Dam, where he was also working at the parks with the Park Service. So that magical place, transformation. What I wanted to say is I soon realized that there had to be indigenous myths, and maybe some of those would also involve transformation. And sure enough, there are. So I'm sharing you just a little bit. There's a chapter in my book called Winter Story. And there I share some of the indigenous stories that I researched. So I'm going to read this just briefly. And this is the Arikara people of the Upper Missouri's origin story. Without the help of the kingfisher, the Arikara people of the Great Plains would not have found a better world. To journey westward from a hiding place underground after the Creator sent floodwaters to eliminate giants, 3 birds helped them overcome obstacles to reach a better place: a kingfisher, an owl, and a loon. Coming to a chasm, Kingfisher reshaped the earth and laid down an enormous beak that served as a bridge. With a great flapping of wings, owl cleared a thorny forest, and fast-flying loon parted a lake. The people could choose whether to continue or turn into the bird that helped them. A kingfisher, I'd be tempted. And I have to say, I would need all the help I could get, because I soon found out how naive I was. Oh, I'm going to go pursue this bird of happiness. Well, if any of you know kingfishers, they're wary, they fly away from you, they're difficult to follow. And I'm just adding in something today, because once I did get started, my first full-on season in 2009, right now is about the same time when in my book chapter called Courting Kingfishers takes place, almost identically. And there's something in here too that's interesting connection to Henry David Thoreau. So I'm going to just take a little bit of a chance because this is something that happened on the Kingfishers were courting on April 11th. This is at April 12th, and it was a breakthrough because I've been looking for them. So I had met my friends, Lisa and Paul, who have a role in my book as fellow naturalists. At a brisk clip, let's see, oh, I see. So I had found this spot and I wanted to show it to them, but I didn't know if the birds were going to show up. But they came along, and within seconds, the alluring rattle coasted toward us. The kingfisher hurtled through the air on arched wings. He circled above us once and whizzed away. We saw a single crisp blue band on a white chest etched on an incandescent sky. Pointing out the holes on the opposite bank, Paul was about to comment when again we heard the signature call. A different kingfisher landed on a high dead branch of a ponderosa. She's a female, whispered Paul, noting the reddish belt. The male returned with another encircling flight. This time the female chattered back, then launched from her perch to fly with him in a double helix of ascension. Turning to Paul, I gave him an impulsive hug. Rattlesnake Creek, place of the bull trout home stream. We'd found a pair of courting kingfishers and only 2.5 miles from my house. Well, I was pretty excited. As it turns out, there's a lot more that happens after that. But I'm going to mention this part. 153 years earlier, also on April 11th, Henry David Thoreau wrote, "Saw a kingfisher on a tree over the water. Does not its arrival mark some new movement in its finny prey? He is the bright buoy that betrays it." So there's a connection to Thoreau in my book. I actually lived in Concord, Massachusetts in high school and was a big follower of Thoreau. So anyway, I thought I had to bring that in because this is the courting season and this is the time. And tomorrow is my son's birthday too. So I had a lot of losing and finding the kingfishers and thinking I had the right hole that they were nesting in and losing it. But with all those hours, so many things would happen, because I would just finally just sit there and wait and observe, and things would happen. Like this turkey just would come right on by, so close. But at last, I finally found what I was looking for. And this boulder here is the kingfisher boulder that plays a role in my book, where very near the nest hole, and the parents would land on the boulder and come and go. So here's when I did find the nest hole. I wrote, "A female kingfisher docked on an immense boulder protruding from the far side of the creek. She bore a silvery minnow held lengthwise within her beak. Rattling once, she cranked upward and into that perfect nest hole, the one I'd missed all along. The round hole showed the telltale 2 furrow marks at the base, rested about 2 feet down from the top of the bank and 4 feet up from the Canaris Creek." So then it was just an incredible thing to start to watch the kingfishers. You can see in this beautiful picture by Don Jones, the great photographer, that this is a very small fish, right? So another thing that is amazing about belted kingfishers is they're so good at fishing that they can pick the right size of a fish to deliver to their chicks. And so in this nest hole, we don't know how many were in there, but typically there's 5 to 8 chicks that can be in there. And in their first week, they feed them those very tiny fish. And one way you can know how big the chicks are getting is each week they bring a bigger fish and a bigger fish and a bigger fish, until by the time they're fledged, that fish is getting to be 5 inches long because they're as big as the adults. So as I write here, whenever a kingfisher sleeted into view with a fish, I was on high alert, questions eddied. Well, that first time, the first exciting time of finding the nest hole, I soon learned that I needed to do something to hide myself far better because I was disturbing the birds. As much as I tried to hide, I couldn't hide well. So what I did is I ordered this turkey hunting find. Oh, did you want that picture? That is amazing. We're going to stay on that for a minute because I love this, the way the two birds are flying into the hole. Sometimes they both would go in, and that's something I will mention before we go to the blind, is that another reason that kingfishers should be the bird of the year and a messenger is they're incredibly egalitarian. Both the males and the females do a lot of work. The female does lay the eggs, but the male is incubating just as much as she is. They're back and forth, and they're pretty much 50-50 on feeding their chicks. So they are a good model, I think, for parenting. So here's the blind that I set up. It's a Cabela's turkey hunting blind, and you can't see the creek, so I have it tucked in there, but the creek is right over there. And so as I wrote here, oh yeah, the world had changed from within the blind. On the one hand, it felt confining. On the other, I was like Harry Potter wearing his cloak of invisibility. Brits have a different term for blinds. They call them hides. I could see the advantage in both names. I wanted the birds to be blind to my presence as I hid like a child in a game of hide and seek. Well, bang, a dipper clanged into the front screen. I ducked as if someone had thrown a dirt clod. The groggy bird staggered to his feet and lurched into the air. The dipper's world had changed too. So just putting up that blind, there had been these nesting dippers. They forgot that, like they know their way around, right? And so a lot of things had to adjust to me being there with the blind. And I learned to spend hours and hours and hours in that blind. But sometimes it was quiet. And in those quiet times, in those lull when I wasn't watching the kingfishers, I had times to think about my dad. And that's another part of this book and the memoir part is my father. It played a really big influence. He still will always in my life. So as I wrote a little bit more than what you see here, hiding in a camouflage blind, I merged with the alders, cottonwoods, and pines. When a Swainson's thrush landed within grasp and opened his beak to sing, I nodded to yet another sign of my bird-loving father's presence, as if we could still revel in the soloist poet of the wafting, spiraling away verse. In the company of creekside inhabitants, sorrows and losses cascaded into the clear waters where bull trout finned upstream to spawn. So my father had died of cancer a few years earlier at age 70. So in this photo, he's with my son. Not too long before that, my son was 5. So, but a part of the book is coming to grips with that loss and ways to reconnect with him. Well, eventually, a very exciting thing happens when you watch a kingfisher nest. It's when those chicks start coming out to the edge of the burrow. And this is actually, a friend of mine did take this photo. I'm not a wildlife photographer, but she came to the blind and there's my kingfisher chick, just checking out the world. And I keep thinking about it. It's like, I always think about what it must be like to be in that deep, dark burrow and 4, 5, 6 feet deep in the earth and gradually coming to the light and then seeing the creek for the first time, and reminds us to remember what it is to see beauty for the first time every day. But once they're out in the world, the kingfishers fledge, they get a little help the first week or so from the parents feeding them, but then they really have to figure it out on their own. And there's a lot of danger out there. This little chick is very smart because he's looking up And because danger comes from above, this is a goshawk, one of the predators of kingfishers, an accipiter, and Cooper's hawks are the main predator, actually. So, and you can tell, by the way, that this is a juvenile, for those who like those feather things, that there's a little rusty color in the blue band shows that that's a younger bird. And sometimes the males can even have they do at the beginning have a little reddish plumage, like they're almost a little like a female, and then they lose that. So here's the big thing is they have to learn how to fly well, right? Because there's a lot to do with all birds have to learn how to fly, but kingfishers particularly do. And so it did take a lot of practice, and I got to witness in the book, you'll read it about just belly flop landings and all kinds of hilarious crash landings. It's not something they do well right away. They're a bit dopey. So, but eventually it's going to come to this, right? And this incredible kingfisher dive is such an amazing thing. You know, it happens so fast, right? So fast. But if you could slow that down, it's just perfection, you know, in terms of the way that bill and the shape of the head is so entering the water just silently, and just the surface there. And there, I talk in the book about biomimicry and how this kingfisher shape of the head has actually been used in Japan to solve a problem of a train called the bullet train. And back in the 90s, that would go through a tunnel at 200 miles per hour, come out the other side, and there'd be this terrible sonic boom. And an engineer who was a birder figured out, wow, we can solve this. We just have to change the shape of the front of the train to look like a kingfisher. And then, you know, and then sure enough, it parted the air around the bird, around the train, and came out the other side quietly, because it's like going from one medium to another. So biomimicry, neat thing, kingfishers. And then another, I talk a lot about this in the book, but just to give you an idea, there's so much going on in that dive. Just the eyes alone, there's red oil droplets that help with the refraction of the water, and there's double foveae, which we only have one, which there's a lot to that helps them keep the fish in view. And they are just, they have lots of cones so they can see colors. So much is going on. And then there's the hovering. Kingfishers can hover. You know, we see ospreys hovering their back, right? Kingfishers do it pretty well too, but they're not the only true hover, of course, is the hummingbird, right? But because it doesn't need any wind, but both the osprey and the belted kingfisher need a little bit of wind so they can keep it, they're flapping so their flight is at the same speed as the wind. But they have to keep their head in perfect stillness, right? Which takes incredible amount of neck muscles to do that. So their tail is kind of rocking and rolling for balance, and the wings are flapping, and everything's moving, but the head is not. So pay attention to that when you see that, because of course they got to keep their eye on the prey below. And as you know, the fishing is marvelous. If you're watching it, they're such good at anglers, and they need to flip that fish around sometimes to have it going the right direction. So probably this female that's flipping the one up there, she's going to swallow that whole head first, with the head going down first, because you don't want the scales the wrong direction. But the one down in the corner is a female that's about to feed that fish to a chick because it's turned the other way. And the only time you see the splash of a kingfisher coming is the kingfisher coming up, never when they're going down. So you see the splash, but it's the return. And that too is super impressive, that a bird can just hit the water with his or her wings like that and get back up. It takes a lot of power. It would be like if you're trying to do a flip turn in the swimming pool, but don't have anything to push off of, right? Pretty amazing. So, well, after the first season, I get into a lot of depth, and I start getting into pursuing the red belt mystery, and I realize it is quite a journey. And in my book, I'm just going to mention some of where it takes me, where I wanted to study the see in person, the ring kingfisher on the lower Rio Grande. I have a chapter on that, and wondered if I could get some hints and clues from the closest relative. And then I went to the back halls of the Smithsonian. I have a chapter called Ghost Kingfishers, and tried to compare the belts to see if, well, maybe if there's some that are brighter and bigger and different, could that then be something in behaviorally out in the with females that had bigger, brighter belts, maybe chase off other females and get the male. You know, there's so much, there's a lot that still needs to be studying if anyone's looking for a project. And then I went over to, there's a chapter on South Africa where I see another of the relatives of the belted kingfishers, the giant. But then I would return to Rattlesnake Creek, and every time I would feel renewed and different. You know how it is when you travel afar and abroad sometimes, and then you come back to Leavenworth, come home, and you just have a whole different appreciation, and you see things in context of the bigger world. And that happened to me as well. And these are my friends, Lisa and Paul Hendricks, who I mentioned, and they are still watching the birds today. And they would come in and out of helping me and being involved. Together, we had a great experience in one of our seasons out there. For one, we've gotten better at finding the birds. And so we saw more things like mating. And there's a lot of frisky mating going on when they are digging nests. So they mate and they dig a nest, and they're using those little feet. Well, mostly they are, until Lisa and Paul and I discovered something that had never been seen before. So we are citizen scientists who are published in the Wilson Journal of Ornithology, because what we saw is that the kingfishers did not, well, just this one time, I'm not going to get into it in detail, but just know that instead of doing what they're supposed to do in the textbooks anyway, which is, you know, just kind of cling to the edge of a cut bank and start working away on a new hole. And then once they got enough of a hole, they start, and they're working with their bills, they start using those feet, and they dig, 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 dig. And they have, by the way, 2 toes are fused, makes a nice little shovel. So a thing of the order they're in. But anyway, what we saw is they were ramming the nest bank. So they would, from about 12 feet away, the steep bank above the creek, they would take turns, and they'd pick this, I guess they just really wanted to nest there, but there was nothing to hold on to. So they just took turns flying as straight into this wall and just bouncing off, you know, so they bang and they just like fall like this, fluttering almost down to the creek. And they kind of get back up looking rather concussed, and then do it again and do it again for 3 mornings. And finally they made a hole. So anyway, we published that. Well, after all the digging that we got to watch, Lisa and Paul and I decided one season that we would dig down and see what was going on in a burrow that we had watched. And so we crossed the creek and we climbed up and we measured with the tape measure all the way into this hole. And it was like 5 feet, 4.5 feet, measured down from the top 2 feet. So then we could figure out exactly where to dig. And there's this football-sized burrow in the back. And so we dug down, checked it out, and I'm making this kind of funny look because I was smelling the soil, which really smells terrible. It's like uric acid because of all the chicks were peeing in there, whatever their version of it is. Except one thing that, I have to tell you this before I move on to this next part, is that we put this back very carefully, all the dirt and everything. And actually the kingfishers use this hole again, burrow. So we were good. But it's interesting though, that kingfishers have stomach acids to aid with their digestion, but the chicks have this extra dose that the adults don't, so they can digest fish bones and scales. And then their chemistry changes once they emerge out of the nest. And this is then what the adults do. I don't know if any of you have seen that before, but they eject a pellet. So All right, well, we're going from that lively story to a quieter time as I can bring this to a bit of a close. We're getting toward the end here, very close to the end. Is that when you're out there with a passion for a bird like I've had, and I'm sure others of you experienced this, the longer you're in one place, the more intimate you become with the wild neighborhood, and you get to be there when things like this happen. These are some of the animals that were with me on Rattlesnake Creek, and these are some of my favorite birds that I witnessed there. That's a varied thrush. How many of you know that beautiful sound, right? I love that so much. And cedar waxwing in the corner, and the dippers, and then a spotted sandpiper. And this is something, this is this is the color of the stones on Rattlesnake Creek. Aren't they beautiful? And this mink, I'm going to read you just a little bit here. Seeking the Halcyon bird, I've come closer to wildlife than ever before. Like one afternoon in late September of 2011, seated by the upper nest bank, drinking in the domain of kingfishers with no real purpose. The creek bubbled over a glossy rock with a gulp and glug, and maroon dogwood leaves shook in a slight breeze. Then, like a river phantom, a sinewy mink flowed over my outstretched bare legs. Feeling the rippling of chocolate-hued fur, I knew the meaning of becoming one with the wild neighborhood. So, there was a time then when I decided this, the kingfisher's rollicking, rolling, ratchety staccato signal our awakening. Attend to be alive is to spread our wings and see where they take us. And for me, I decided in 2015, after my son graduated from high school, that I would become a roving naturalist in my camper for a year. It was time for me to explore. And I had lived in Oregon before I came to Montana. So I went to University of Oregon, and then I had spent a number of years in Oregon, and then I got my master's degree in University of Montana and stayed there for decades. But after I traveled, I decided to come back to Oregon. I'd really missed the Pacific Northwest. So now, this is my picture. I'm watching kingfishers on the Deschutes River, and I'm always telling people whenever I see kingfishers and I see other people, I'm like, hey, have you seen, like get them excited as I am. And, it kind of works. They're like, wow. So I think that's another way we can be messengers and ambassadors. These are just some of the places that are easy to find kingfishers. This is a photo I took actually when I was down at Klamath Falls for the Winter Wings Festival. That's quite a wire series to be over the river. These are some of the things that I look for in terms of the flight of the kingfisher, in terms of that deep wing beat. They can really go down like that, right? And then this is something else that's interesting you might look for when you're watching kingfishers, is this I call a strolling flight, because this bird has a fish, but he's got his head up. So he's like kind of looking around, right? Life's easy. But if he was going to be chasing another male, which they certainly do if they come up to their territory, his head would be aerodynamic and straight flap, and they go so fast. Some other ways you might see kingfishers straight on, and notice how that blue-black back when they're from above and white from below. And some people wonder, how big a fish can a kingfisher fish for? And this is a Rocky Mountain whitefish. A friend of mine over in Boise took this. And yeah, this kingfisher wanted so much to hang on to this whitefish, but I don't know, it might have been 6 inches. It was too big. So, but right now, so those are just a few little scenes of looking for kingfishers. And certainly right now it is their courting time. It is an exciting time to see a male and female together. So it's a wonderful time to be looking for them, but they're not easy. But what I'd like you to do is, this is your chance as I come to a close, is think of some stretch of water. It might not be this one, right? Beautiful Wenatchee River out the door, but something that you're very close to, and you've had a time when you've become one with your wild, watery neighborhood. And you might be, so think of a time, maybe there's fish rising or beavers slapping a tail, maybe there was a dragonfly. And close your eyes just for a moment and envision that place. And this is where the rattle of the kingfisher goes, except it didn't work on my screen, but there you are. But yes, it's your chance to be in touch. And I love that the Wenatchee River Institute is just right there by the river. So beautiful. So this is the Metolius River and one of my favorites. So wherever I go, the kingfisher is my compass, still my way of finding true north. And I'm alert to that call. And I do think this is a bird that really links the whole headwaters to the sea. And how cool that the female is brighter than the male, and she might even hold the power. And plus that kingfishers are extraordinary anglers. They can hover and plunge and and they're wonderful parents, and so much about the kingfisher, right? So how might these qualities play out, though, that they're also elusive and skittish and territorial? Well, I think it adds to the mystique, and it's a bird that knows what it is to guard and defend our homes with love. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Very well. So do we have time for a few questions, Joshua? Okay, well, if any of you have questions, I'd love to.
I do.
Yes.
So I don't know tons about the kingfisher. I'm learning. I bought your book.
Oh, good. And I'm happy to sign.
I love that. So 30 years ago, as I was driving back and forth to Wenatchee to work, I spotted a bird. It was a kingfisher, because I went and kind of tried to figure it out. And I saw that bird on the same limb every morning almost as I went to work. So it was just for years and years and years. And now I live just around the bend over here on the river, and there's a kingfisher there, kingfishers. Now I have good binoculars, so I can tell now what, male, female. But there are limbs that kingfisher, they're always on. That's where I find them.
Oh, you are such a wonderful observer. That is so good.
But that's
So
is
true.
that what they do?
Yes, I think they have
Okay.
favorite spots.
Oh, it's
Absolutely.
because it's-
And if you watch, they will. What's very unpredictable sometimes is like how is the nesting thing sometimes, and they do move around, but you're right. They have favorite perches, favorite spots. And I just recently was noticing that how this one, I was watching this kingfisher for a while, and then I went back to the same place. It was almost like, okay, I'm going to go to this branch, then I'm going to go to this particular. This one actually went on a boulder, then this, then I'll do that again. It's like, and some of it has to do with, if you're a good fly fishing person, which of course I am not, I wish I was, but it's where there's some really good fishing too. It's a combination.
Where there are eddies
Mhm.
and different parts,
Yeah.
because there's a loop
Yeah.
where it comes through.
Yeah,
So-
but it's that's a good
Okay.
observation.
Okay.
And it's so yeah.
Okay. So I keep looking for, well, that hasn't happened, but after the first one for 3-4 years, and then there was a break, and then there was another kingfisher sitting on that same branch as I went to Wenatchee. Would their kids would you think in any way,
That they would know.
or follow? Or
It's hard to know because they do take off, the young ones take off. And they
Okay.
don't necessarily come back, or they may go to some other areas or things, and they don't share very well in their areas. Mhm.
So it's some other room.
Yeah,
It just random and they found another great branch.
I think you should keep this study going. Very important.
Well, it's fun because it's
Yeah.
a certain thing that I look for all the time.
It's good.
So, okay.
Marina. I have a couple questions.
Oh, yes.
What is the biggest threat to kingfishers? And then there's a second question. What is the evolution story of kingfishers?
Okay, the first question, what is the biggest threat? We are. We're the threat, I'm afraid, to every species on this planet, unfortunately. And, and that's because they have to have enough water. They have to have water, they have to have fish, they have to, so I think they're threatened in the way of everything that depends on our clean fish-filled waters. And they're also along the way, the studies that have been done about kingfishers tend to be related to mercury poisoning. Because they are at the top of the food chain, fish-eating birds are more susceptible to mercury. So that's a threat. The studies weren't all that conclusive, mostly because kingfishers are hard to study. But yeah, some toxins. And then in other parts of the world, kingfishers are threatened they're killed for their feathers. There's still a black market for kingfisher feathers. So I write about that some too. But at least on the positive side, there was a time when, back in the 50s and things, where there were bounties for kingfishers, belted kingfishers, because they were considered competitors to fishermen. So we have come a long way since then. So that's a good thing. And the second one, the evolution, that may be too much to go into, but I'll just say that the cradle of kingfisher civilization is the Indonesia area mostly. And that's where they think they evolved from. And then there were these events in terms of the New World kingfishers. We have a lot fewer species here. We just have the 5 in South America, and then that includes the belted up here compared to all those others. So there were they believe these events where a kingfisher would make it across the Atlantic. And there was some going back and forth. So our kingfisher probably originated in Africa, but yeah, there's a chapter in my book where I go into that in more detail, but the Crassiformes order is an interesting old order of birds, and they go far back in the fossil history. Yes.
You know if there's any studies on their accuracy rate when they dive down and go for a fish, how often they get one? Because when I've watched bald eagles and kingfishers, it seems kingfishers get a lot more fish than bald eagles do.
I don't know of any study like that. I think it would be kind of interesting, wouldn't it, to do that? There you go. But I agree. I've definitely seen them miss too. But yes, I think they're really good. Of course, going head first, compared to the eagle and the osprey with their talons, maybe that's easier. But no, I don't know of any. But I agree, they're really good at it, but they miss. Yeah, in the back.
So one of your last photos was a kingfisher going after a fish that looked to be just about the same size as it.
Yeah.
Here, it makes me wonder, do they always swallow their food whole, or do they take it somewhere and pick it apart?
They always swallow it whole. You probably noticed how a kingfisher will whack a fish like with their beak. They just go knock it really hard against a branch. And that's mostly to soften the bones so that they can more easily swallow them rather than just worrying about whether they're alive or not. But it does stun the fish too. But yeah, no, always whole. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Mm-hmm.
What country does the kookaburra in Africa? Does the kookaburra come from?
The Australia, is that the kookaburra? Yes, the kookaburra is in Australia.
Okay.
Biggest-
Thinking that there was an African species.
Oh, yes, the giant, oh, no, there isn't. The kookaburra is only, but there are some, there are definitely, the kookaburra is in a tree. And I don't think it matters what kind. I'm not an expert on that. I've never been to Australia, darn it. But, yeah, so, but there are some that are, more like woodpeckers in terms of excavating in old trees like that. But there's certainly a lot more that nest in banks, river banks.
And what
In banks,
countries in Africa would have kingfisher?
all of them.
Oh, all of
Yeah, there's a lot of kingfishers in Africa. Yeah, the giant kingfisher that's related, but there's a whole lot of pied kingfisher I write about. So I have one chapter in the book on South Africa. So, yeah, Joshua.
Are kingfishers equally in lakes? I think.
Oh, equally in lakes and rivers. They are definitely around lakes. I think, I don't know about the answer whether they're equally or not. A lot of it does have to do with whether there's good nesting habitat, good perches, good fishing. And I've certainly seen them fishing pretty far out in the water on a lake and on a bay. So they will go out far, but it is a little bit of a limiting factor for them to fish far out in the water. That's where, like in Africa, there's a pied kingfisher that's the ultimate hover. It's the best hovering kingfisher in the world. And they do spend a lot of time way out on lakes. So I think it's, belted kingfisher will hover, but not, it's easier to be closer to the bank. So I don't know if that's really answering the question, but yeah, they're definitely around lakes too. Lakes, bays, marshes, waters, rivers, creeks. Yeah. Any others from the hybrid? Well, any other questions? Yes. Me.
When you were talking about how they were ramming into the banks. to
Yeah.
create their cavities, are they going beak first? Or
Yes.
they were going straight?
They're just hitting their beak, bang.
So they're just kind of chiseling.
Yeah, exactly. And it was chiseling it. And then they started to grab a little bit of dirt as they come out with some dirt on their beak. Yeah, it was crazy. It was painful to watch, but well, I do want to put a little pitch in for my nature writing workshop. And if any of you would, I'm going to have fun teaching. And I know we have at least one participant here tonight. And so if any of you have time from 2 to 4 tomorrow, you don't have to be a writer. You could just want to have fun playing with senses and words and nature. And so anyway, that's going on. And then I do also, I say review my book after you read it. There's that whole thing. I have to say every now and then, if you put a review on Goodreads or Amazon, it kind of helps the sales. So I appreciate that. And then my blog, I have a bi-monthly nature blog that I write on my website, which is just my name. So I just put one out yesterday. So before I go, and that was, and I am writing more and more poetry now. So there's quite a bit of poetry on my blog too. So, and do feel free to contact me. I'm very happy to stay in touch with people who are interested in kingfishers. And then finally, I hope you will support our wonderful bookstore here, and I'll be back here with Randy to sign any books. So thank you. We'll share it. Look at my water.
Marina, thank you so much again for being here this evening.
You're welcome.